Here today on Saturday, April 25th with Matt Berson of Love Squalor Wines. Hello, Matt.
Hi, everybody. Hi, John.
Hey. To the wines. First of all, the two wines that, of course, Matt and I got together and talked about what we're going to taste before and traded bottles. So we each have a set of the four wines we're going to taste. For me, I have my 2018 Pinot Blanc, as well as my 2018 Redford Wettle Farm Gamay Noir. So it's from Myron Redford's vineyard and Vicky Wettle's vineyard, just down the hill from the winery, literally down the hill. It's just a mile straight down. And Matt, what do you have?
So we're going to taste today the 2018 Sauvignon Blanc, and then a new release which just went up on the website and was just bottled a couple weeks ago, which is the 2018 Gamay. So we're going Blanc to Blanc and Gamay to Gamay today.
Yeah. Blanc to Blanc, head to head, a different Blanc, but same vintage. So I'll start off with the Pinot Blanc 2018 Willamette Valley. Thank you, Matt. My spokesmodel, Mr. Berson. So this is all from Yamhill Valley Vineyards and the McMinnville AVA, sub-AVA of the Willamette Valley. McMinnville AVA is really known for very thin soils. Well, a mix. There's some lower elevation stuff that has more of the sedimentary soil, but there's a lot of bell pine, kind of thin the lower elevation has more volcanic soil. The higher has more of the sedimentary soils. This is kind of a mix, but it's in the northern edge of the Van Duzer corridor. And what the Van Duzer corridor is it's a lowland route to the coast. And what happens is the warm air in the valley in the summertime sucks in the cold ocean air in the evening. So you get very quick diurnal switches in temperature. It really affects the McMinnville AVA first, and then, of course, Van Duzer AVA, which is a new sub-AVA of the Willamette Valley, and the Willamette Hills. These three AVAs are really heavily affected by the winds from the Van Duzer corridor. So you get thicker skins on red or on all grapes, but also you get really good acid retention. The nights cool down very quickly. You'll hold the acids nicely in the grapes. It takes a long time for the grapes to ripen just to get the acidity in the right place. So we only made like 100 cases of this year. The quick questions may have asked. But we've been making Pinot Blanc since, I want to say 2008. I can't remember. But we do press these grapes whole cluster in the press, settle the juice that comes from the pressing of the grapes for about a day or two. And then this is fermented and aged in oak. We use this term, we throw it around a lot. We say neutral oak. But what we mean by neutral oak is barrels that have been used for, to me, it's 4+ years. Meaning after a while, they're simply aging vessels and they don't really offer much flavor. You still get the air going through the wood pores and you get the aging and polishing of the wine, and you lose a little freshness from that. But you can gain some density and richness in the wine, which is why we do it, because it's a high acid wine, but you can really build some nice rich mid-palate with it.
So there's quite a savory quality to this wine. What I don't usually get that out of Pinot Blanc necessarily.
Well,
do you think it's to the aging or to?
I'd say a bit of both, the aging and also just the area. It tends to be pretty lean and linear kind of Pinot Blanc. It's not that super ripe style that you'd get in a warmer area. For example, this year I purchased Pinot Blanc from 12 Oaks Estate in Chehala Mountain. It's more broad and more pear. This gets more citrusy to me.
Yeah, and it's got a nice acid to it.
Great acid.
Yeah.
So I made Pinot Blanc only once when I was working in New Zealand, and I remember the juice being really yellow. Was that the case?
Yeah, almost greeny. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like neon in its brightness, whereas like Sauv Blanc is a little green and clear, and Riesling's a little bit golden. But I remember that.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like early picks of Chardonnay as well. Yeah, it's but yeah, I get a little bit of pear fruit out of it, but also more citrus, kind of like a lemony lemon, like a oil from the zest.
It's a little bit of a aromatic melon in the finish too, which is nice. It kind of opens up and gives it a little more like musk melon or honeydew or something, something a little more aromatic, which is nice and lends a little juiciness or an idea of juiciness to it, even though it finishes very nice and lean.
Yeah, it's what I like, what we do. I mean, since it has such bright acids, and we talked about doing the barrel fermentation and such, we also get on lees, and lees is something I got some LEES is how you spell it. What lees are spent yeast cells and other solids that fall out of the wine after the fermentation has completed, and so those lees kind of build up the richness and palate texture in the wine. And so even though this is 12.8% alcohol, it's fairly lean. It really has a broad mid palate to me, and that's why we ferment it this way. If we fermented it in stainless steel and aged it in stainless steel, it would be more compact and linear and more estery, very bright, and more aromatic in the sense of just kind of popping esters of aromatics.
Yeah. So the next wine that we're going to taste is the Love Squalor Sauvignon Blanc from 2018. It's in the Willamette Valley Greater AVA. I made about 200 cases of it. I got into Sauvignon Blanc because all the wineries that I was working for, Patty Green, Jay Christopher, Andrew Rich, they called themselves the Sauvignon Blanc cartel at the time, and I wanted to be a Goomba to go get them sandwiches. So I made a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc too. I wanted to be in the cartel, Hey,
you got the hair for it.
Yeah, thank you very much. In any case, they were all sourcing from Croft Vineyard, but I found another source, and this is I did the first Sauvignon Blanc I did in 2014, and this is sourced from a vineyard called Aurora Colony Vineyard. Aurora Colony was the original name of the town of Aurora, and it's right down on the valley floor, right on the banks of a tributary of the Willamette River. And usually this wouldn't be a great spot for growing grapes. We tend to prefer well-drained soils on slopes where gravity helps, and thinner soils. But this vineyard is really well farmed, and I really like the fruit I tasted from there. And it definitely shapes the kind of Sauv Blanc this is. So because it's warmer, more fertile soils, it ripens quicker. It's the first fruit to come into the vineyard, and it makes a little bit more of I wouldn't call it rich, but a full-bodied Sauv Blanc. It still has the signature Love Squalor acid, aromatics in the front and acid in the back. But the middle of this is a little bit fatter, a little bit more giving. So this is kind of the aperitif wine. I don't think I'm ever going to make, Sancerre here. We don't have the soils for it. And we're definitely not going to make New Zealand style Sauv Blancs here. So I was thinking about, what's an Oregon style Sauv Blanc? It can be whatever, because there's no real history of it. So this is what I'm doing.
I remember Marcus did it with his Pinot Gris on the Clover, which I really loved.
Yeah, so John's talking about Marcus Goodfellow, who's a mutual friend, also a restaurant reject who became a winemaker. And one of the more fun periods of my winemaking was when all three of us shared a cellar for a little bit, John and Marcus and I. It was a good time. Well, one thing I was going to say is the yeast protocol on this Sauv Blanc is actually from you, John. So I asked everyone, I was asking around, like, what yeast do I use? So I go, and John's like, well, I like to use champagne yeast on it. And I'd never used that before. And champagne yeast is sort of notorious for being very quick and very linear. and it goes dry. And I find that's a great counterpoint for this richer, riper fruit. It gives it that it doesn't lend any character to it, and just kind of goes right through it. Gets it nice and dry, and keeps it kind of nice, keeps it nice and tight. The whole package, even though it's kind of a little bit flowsy in the middle. This also has a little bit a barrel of wild yeast, fermented in barrel. So I like to put in just for a little umami.
Well, and yeah, talking about yeast, we did in the last episode, and for Vincent, all his whites were native, and for me, all my whites are a mix of native and wild, and or native and and cultured. So you can buy yeast at a store, not unlike the way you buy yeast at the grocery store for baking, but you can buy different cultures of yeast that have been isolated in certain growing regions, and you know the attributes that they can add or the kinetics, how good they are at fermenting and so forth. Whereas the native or wild are just letting it go with the yeast that's on the grapes in the winery, what have you. They just kind of take off, and it's really many yeast working when you don't add any yeast, because certain yeast will work at the early side and die off when the alcohol level starts coming up and so forth. So just a little bit of information on the yeast thing we're talking about here. We also got a question, I forgot to say this, wine or food pairings for these wines. You know, for me, for Pinot Blanc, it's one of those things, white fish, it doesn't, you don't want the food to be too rich or too creamy, something that's a light saute, vegetables, light saute of chicken, not too strong flavors. Fish, even shellfish. I mean, that would be great to use some for cooking.
Really good with some oysters, actually.
What was that?
I think it would be really great. Your Pinot Blanc would be really great with some oysters. I can taste a little sweet in there. That would be really nice.
Yeah, thanks. And so the Sauvignon, you're saying?
Yeah, Sauvignon. It would go great with a bowl, a pot full of clams, or the little pancetta in there or whatever. But it's great with the cheese plate, appetizers.
Yeah, like fresher cheeses and good conversation, and
some nice runny cheeses, and maybe some nice fatty saucisson. Would just do it. I think. Why are you laughing?
Just wanted to say fatty and runny. Let's just move to the next wine, shall we? We're going to do a little Gamay Redford Weddell 2018. This is a brand new release. It's just going up on the website. Redford Weddell. So Gamay, for me, when you're learning about wine,
beautiful color.
Learning about how wine shows place and so forth. Beaujolais is like the best place to study, because you can find Gamay Noir really shows place, not unlike Pinot Noir. And if you but the price of say Burgundy is tenfold on great Beaujolais. So in Beaujolais you can find just great, there's 7 crus I think in Beaujolais, Morgon, Junas, and Moulin Avant, and so Fleury and so forth. They're all very different, and so it's a great place to study wine without spending a lot of money. So I've always from the early days of learning about wine loved Beaujolais. And then I had the good luck of working at Brickhouse Vineyards, and Doug Tennell there. He really, Gamay had been around the Willamette Valley for a while by then, but he planted quite a bit more than most people, and made more than most people starting in the mid 90s. So he really went after it. And working there, we drank a lot of it while working there.
Can I break in? So for those who don't know, Gamay was the only other red varietal that was permitted in Burgundy in the development, and then was sort of pushed out. And there's still a little bit of Gamay in Burgundy. Usually it's bottled as Pas du Grand, which is a blend of Pinot and Gamay. So it is sort of, I view it as kind of a cousin, you know, it has some of the same delicacy, but just a little bit more of a fruit aspect and a little richer.
Mhm.
In the Willamette Valley, Myron was the first on record to plant it.
Mhm. And that's
In the 70s, and that's who grows this vineyard.
yeah. So yeah, this is Myron Redford and Vicky Weddle, his wife's vineyard, just down the hill from the winery.
But they planted it at Amity Vineyards.
Right, his former winery is
in the
Amity.
late 70s. Yeah.
Do you
Right.
want to explain Beaujolais Nouveau as well? Because a lot of people don't know what that is.
John, you could take that.
About what Beaujolais Nouveau is versus
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
yeah. Well, Nouveau is it's a early release Gamay Noir. So they harvest the grapes, ferment the wine, bottle it all before this third week of November is released, third Thursday of November. So it's very primary, very youthful, very juicy. It's like it's not for everybody. It's super fruity and primary and fresh and vibrant and very, I mean, I hesitate to use the term sweet, but the fruit is very opulent.
Yeah. It's a little sharp too. It's a little sharp, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it gets pushed through secondary fermentation and
Right.
it doesn't see any barrel time, doesn't see any élevage. It's just like boom. It's just a festive harvest drink. Really, it's like, whoa, we did the harvest, and here's the first thing. You know, it's a party wine. So a lot of people don't know because they did such a good job of marketing that
Right.
as Gamay. But a lot of people are only now discovering that there's a whole deeper history of these Beaujolais crus and all that stuff.
Yeah. But we definitely don't make this to be a nouveau style. We're going for a little bit more of the cru style, a little bit more density and richness and intensity. We ferment it. We don't do carbonic maceration, which is the main method for making nouveau, or the method, which again even highlights that primary fruit even more than the standard open top fermentation that we do with our Gamay and Pinot Noirs. We also use stems in our fermentation. So this says 1/3 whole cluster. And we do that to bring that more of that savory side, kind of brushy side. It's rather than just the berry fruit. It's some of the leaves and vines along with that berry in this. And so we aged it for 10 months in oak, again, neutral oak. So very old barrels, 5, 6, 7-year-old barrels. And we didn't rack it during that time. Also, this is a certified organic site, has been since it started. So very, very good, high detailed farming by Jose there.
That's delicious, John.
It is. It has a wonderful aroma too. It's a little floral. I smell some flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that can be typical. Rose petals and stuff can be very typical of Beaujolais. But what I like is the stem, the spiciness of the stem, which I like to use stems in fermentation to sort of, I see it as like breaking open something that might be a little too dense or rich. It kind of like adds, it kind of opens it up and allows it to blossom a bit with an addition of like kind of a spiciness. If that makes sense a little bit.
Yeah. I like it.
And I get that on the nose as well as in the palate a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about, Gamay is always so fruity, and so we're trying to temper, and even more so in the new world relative to the old world in France. So we're trying to temper that fruitiness a little bit and bring some savory. And I like the tannin it adds to the wine too. It doesn't add like an astringent tannin, if your stems are ripe, mind you. It adds more of a mid-palate textural tannin that I feel broadens the mid-palate.
Just a tiny bit of tannin in there. It's nice. Good texture.
Yeah, so you make how many Gamays?
We make 3 single vineyards right now, and then a Willamette Valley cuvee. So
4 different Gamay bottlings.
Right, and 2 are from the Ola Amity Hills. So we have this one, Redford Weddle Farm, and then we have Bjornson Vineyard, which is only maybe 4 miles away as a crow flies, but hugely different. This is on the east side of the Ola Amity Hills, so more protected from wind and a little warmer. whereas the Bjornson vineyard faces southwest. So it catches more wind and more sun. So it ripens, gosh, probably 2 weeks later. Has higher acid and tends to be this very dark, dense, and firm, thicker skins, dark, dense, and firm profile. And that one we age a bit longer in barrel, not unlike yours, about 15 months in barrel versus only 10.
So one thing I'm going to tell people is that another thing there's more and more people making Gamay in the Willamette Valley. There's a little blossoming of people doing it. I think partly because it's such a great companion to Pinot Noir. And there's not a lot of Gamay fruit planted, but there's more going in the ground every day. And so you're going to see more of it. One thing that we're missing because of this COVID crisis is the annual I Heart Gamay Festival, which usually happens the third week of May. So if you're into Gamay, you should make it next year, but they're going to do some sort of virtual thing for the Gamay Fest. I'm going to put a little plug in for it if this is your jam, to do that. And there's going to be 3 or 4 different online panel discussions and tastings. Just fun stuff.
Are you going to be a part of it?
Yeah, I am taking part. I don't have the date. We'll post it on the website, but
yeah,
we're going to be taking part in a France versus Oregon knockdown. I hope I get to taste the French ones. Yeah. So talking of Gamay, let's do another one. So this Gamay, none of you have because it hasn't been released yet, but we just put it up. We just put it up on the site. We bought it a couple weeks ago. Willamette Valley 2018. So usually I've been making Gamay since 2014, maybe 13, no, 14. Usually it only stays in barrel for 10 months. So I bottle it before harvest. But the last couple of years, really just because of logistics, I haven't been able to get to it. I've been moving wineries. Angie and I moved into a brand new winery last year, which is where we're broadcasting from, and I can't wait to have you all here when we reopen again.
It's a cool building.
We're very fortunate and very excited about it. Yeah, so we have a tasting room here, as well as our cellar, that's our barrel room is behind you, and our production in back. But anyway, because of all this movement, I haven't gotten around to bottling it as soon as I'm used to. So the 18, saw about a year and a half in puncheons, so in neutral puncheons, so older oak. Puncheons are double-sized barrels. I can't tell you what the vineyard source is because in my journey of Gamay, I've had 3 different sites get pulled out from under me, either stolen or promises broken. It's a trail of tears to get to this vineyard, but it's mine. It's a somewhat marginal site right near the Chehalem Valley AVA. So the soils there are pretty much laurelwood. So the laurelwood series is very sandy and silty, so very well draining. So when it rains there, like if there's an inch of rain, it's gone in this area. In a couple of hours, you wouldn't have known it rained underneath those vines because it just drains so quickly, which is amazing. I started working with a couple other vineyards in that area recently because I like the wines, and there's some great growing going on there, and it's also closer to my new winery, so I can be more involved with the growing there. So it's a somewhat marginal site. It's right off the best named road in Oregon. It's called Beef Bend Road. So we've been working with it for a few years. We go in a couple times. They farm it. The vineyard crew from Sokol Blosser farms it, but we go in ourselves a couple times during the year and to drop fruit. And then we go in very extensively about a week before harvest. And so we go in a couple months before, or a month before, to open it up. because Gamay can grow very densely. And it's hard to ripen in that site. And then we come in about a week before. We drop anything that's green, anything that's got any mold, anything that's anything that looks at me sideways goes on the ground. And we end up yeah, like no, don't do that. You're gone.
Okay.
And give him my best Goomba face and get him out of there. And we end up with about 1.5 tons, 1.75 tons off of that. It comes in, and I know we've just been through the whole acreage, so we don't have to sort it. We might pick some leaves out of it or what have you. So we just dump it directly into a macro bin, which is a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot food grade plastic cube. A macro bin is filled with dry ice, so it has no oxygen in it, stems and all. We drop it in there. And then wrap it, put a tarp over it, basically a piece of plastic over it, and wrap it tight with tape. And we keep it like that for about 10 days to 2 weeks, depending on how gutsy I'm feeling. We twice a day, I cut a little slit in the top, and twice a day I put CO2 gas directly into it. So this is what's known as carbonic maceration. There's different ways to achieve it, but basically it's an anaerobic, a no oxygen methodology. And this is what's used for Beaujolais Nouveau, very typically, which brings out that fruitiness. But basically what happens is like a little enzymatic reaction happens inside each berry, and it's like fermentation, and it starts fermenting in there. And so each little berry is this very like delicious little fruit bomb inside of it. And then after about a couple weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks, like I said, we open it up, we stomp on it, and we allow regular alcoholic fermentation.
Say the other part again.
Yes, Lucy, we do step on the grapes.
We're always asked that question.
Yes, we do.
Do you stomp on the grapes like Lucy?
Pigeage.
I do.
Pigeage is the French term, but everyone says, like Lucy.
Well, I always, when I do it, I have to sing my flash dance. You know, moment. He's a maniac, maniac. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. I'm going to ask anything to add. Oh, tell us about the new winery, where it is and everything.
Yes, so the new winery, the building is called Portland Wine Company, which is pretty self-explanatory. we good at naming things. So it's
Southeast Portland, Southeast 50th, just north of Powell. And we have about 700 square feet of a tasting room, but we can open up a wall into the barrel room, and we have a garage door to a parking lot, so it's a great party space. So we had all these events planned for April and May, which is great months to have parties, and of course we've canceled them all, so it's kind of sad that we don't get to do that since it's a new space. We opened in October.
Yeah, but and also, anyway, it's a nice sunny tasting room.
You want me to turn it around so people can see it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, why not? I mean, you can see the sun. And while you're, yeah, it's beautiful. I'll raise up a little. There you go. Yeah, so definitely when we actually can move around, you got to check it out.
We have a jukebox.
Close in. Oh yeah, the jukebox. That was in Matt's living room forever, so it's not a new.
Been waiting for a winery for what was it, 13 years?
So when we designed the space, the first thing that went into the tasting room, the architect drew in. It said jukebox provided by owner.
Like, they want. Yes. Yeah. Over and out.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.